Protestants will be participating in the Synod next month. Is that a problem? Join us with the latest from the Eternal City, Church Militant Rome correspondent, Dr. Jules Gomes. Jules, Protestants joining the Synod next month, along with the bishops, as participants, not observers. Is that true?
Absolutely. For the first time in recent Catholic history, the Vatican has issued a list of participants, and that list is divided into 4 categories, Brad. There are the members, there are special invitees, there are fraternal delegates, and then there are other participants. The fraternal delegates, about 10 of them, I think, are people from Protestant, Eastern Orthodox, and Oriental Orthodox churches. And yes, they will be participating. There is no concept of observer or auditor in this synod on synodality, like there was, for example, at Vatican II and other major Catholic synods. So they will be participating, taking, a full part in the deliberations, in the discussions. They will, however, not be allowed to vote.
Okay, so they will be participating in framing the discussion, in on the discussions and everything. You just won't be voting on that. Okay. One particular Protestant, though, attending he's against the whole gay agenda and even called for anti-gay legislation in Uganda. Can you tell us about him and what he is saying?
Now, this story, Brad, comes with a large dose of irony. We are talking about apostle. Yes, he calls himself an apostle from the Church of Pentecost in Ghana, where the top leader is called an apostle. So this is Apostle Opoku Onyina. And he is very clear about the biblical position on homosexuality. So not only is he vehemently against homosexual relations, but he was one of those who led the charge in calling for the Parliament of Uganda to unambiguously, his own words, legislate on homosexuality and criminalize homosexual behavior. Now, part of the irony of the story is, of course, the fact that Pope Francis in February, when returning from the Democratic Republic of the Congo and from South Sudan, where he went with Archbishop Justin Welby and the moderator of the Church of Scotland, was very clear that he opposed any form of criminalization of homosexuality. And Pope Francis, said that there should be no criminalization of homosexuality anywhere in the world.
And before moving on, just to clarify, Uganda did move forward with that and actually did criminalize homosexuality, correct?
Absolutely. And this took place in August. It received the presidential assent. The bill is still being reviewed, but it has passed. In fact, it was passed unanimously. And those voting for it, a large majority were Anglicans, followed by Pentecostals, a few Catholics in Parliament. But the Ghanaian Catholic bishops, the Ghanaian Anglican bishops, Pentecostal leaders, Muslim leaders, and members of traditional religions, all of them supported the bill to the hilt.
And the Pentecostal preacher, the one he calls himself the apostle, exactly where and when did he make his strong statements calling for criminalization of homosexuality and pushing that back to the peripheries?
Now, the apostle, by the way, is a very interesting person. He has had relations with the Vatican before. He has a PhD from the University of Birmingham in theology, an MA from Manchester University. He's published quite a few books and articles. He's a televangelist, a theologian, and but his position on homosexuality remains unchanging, and what he said about just before when Parliament went into session discussing this bill, it began in 2021, and of course COVID was raging all over the world at that time. And listen very carefully to how he's talking to other Christian leaders in Uganda and saying homosexuality is totally unacceptable.
Sometimes I consider some of the things that are going on as glorified foolishness. Foolishness that has been glorified. Because you know that if you take the LGBT agenda into consideration, some of the things you cannot just think about it. Some time ago, people couldn't have come publicly to say this thing. It was an abomination. But we have tolerated this thing to the point that we have glorified it. But it's glorified foolishness.
Oh, absolutely. You can hear that, him calling homosexuality or the promotion of the LGBT agenda glorified foolishness. He appears to be doing a little Bible study with this group, or a little talk from the Bible. And then he, again, very clearly using biblical language, calls it an abomination. The word toeva in Hebrew. He also says that once upon a time it would, be practically impossible to even talk about these things in public, but now it's creeping, infiltrating, and taking over every aspect of society.
Now, why would Pope Francis invite him? What do they have in common?
Well, they don't seem to have much in common. I mean, part of the reason he's been invited is because Pope Francis wants to demonstrate his ecumenical credentials and also demonstrate his post-colonial credentials, shall we say. He wants people from the non-Western part of the world. And the apostle seemed to be an ideal candidate, particularly because he's had relations with the Vatican. Now, we don't know, and I wrote to the Holy See Press Office asking them to clarify if they knew that the apostle was so vehemently opposed to homosexuality legislation that criminalizes homosexuality. I have not yet received an answer. But one thing he and Pope Francis do share in is the opposition to ideological colonization, the fact that the Western world should not tell the Third World, particularly countries like Africa, what to do, and particularly use, aid to as a bribe, as a carrot and stick to force them to accept the LGBT agenda. Now, interestingly, when Theresa May was Prime Minister of Britain, she rebuked Ghana for going ahead with this anti-LGBT legislation. And our friend, the apostle, was interviewed, and listen to what he says. Listen to how he shoots back at Theresa May.
Because it's against our culture. It's a taboo in Ghana. It's a taboo to Christianity, a taboo to Muslims, taboo to traditional religion. Why then should you tell us to do something that is taboo to all the various social sectors? It's an insult.
And can you give us a little paraphrase there on what he's actually laying down?
Well, absolutely. He's saying that the practicing homosexuality, and many Africans have told me this. This is a taboo in our culture, not just culturally, but Muslims definitely rule it out. So do Christians, so do people from traditional religions. And the apostle is saying that, don't dare to impose it on us. Elsewhere in the video, by the way, he also talks about how Uganda needs to stand on its own 2 feet so that the West won't be able to use financial aid as a carrot and stick. Now, remember, Brad, this legislation is very severe. It jails a person for up to 10 years for propaganda advocacy of the LGBT agenda, if you are committing a sodomy, you could land up in prison for up to 5 years. And there are even laws prohibiting cross-dressing and posing as a member of the other sex. So transgenderism, for example, is ruled out completely.
Now, Pope Francis really came out strong in this last year, pushing exactly against the opposite for that type of legislation, correct?
Correct. He was asked by a reporter when flying back from South Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo whether, he has an opinion on the criminalization of homosexuality. And this is in the heat of countries like Uganda. Uganda has passed a law that prescribes the death penalty for sodomy. So Ghana was preparing its own legislation at that time. This was in February. And Pope Francis again went into his spiel about how God loves everybody and God welcomes everybody. And so, while we may consider homosexuality to be a sin, it is unacceptable that countries make it a crime and basically take away the human rights of homosexuals, lesbians, and transgender people.
Now, shifting gears for a moment, there's another Protestant, an Anglican bishop, who will be also participating in the Synod next month, who really isn't so faithful to the gospel. Tell us about him.
Well, Bishop Warner, Martin Warner, the Bishop of Chichester, is a controversial figure. He is an Anglo-Catholic, and so, not surprisingly, he's being delegated to be one of the fraternal delegates at the Synod on Synodality. In February, Bishop Warner signed a statement with 14 other more or less conservative Anglican bishops, and here's what they said. They basically said that we will not accept same-sex marriage, but homosexuals need to be made welcome, and the church should demonstrate that welcome through some symbolic gesture. So what they were saying basically is that, we welcome same-sex blessings, which is precisely what liberal bishops and cardinals in the Catholic Church want to do, and which is precisely one of the points on the agenda of the Synod on Synodality. So in August, the Church of England actually passed legislation accepting same-sex blessings for the first time in its own history. So Martin Warner is known to be very pro-gay. He has addressed conferences in Brighton, which is the epicenter of the LGBT movement in England. He also had very harsh words against a conservative Anglican by the name of Andrea Minicello-Williams, who is doing fantastic work protecting the rights of Christians in the United Kingdom. She went to Jamaica and she spoke in favor of their own laws, which prohibit or at least restrict homosexual behavior. And he attacked her fiercely in the media, saying that she was backward-looking, etc., etc.
So really it's going to be a mixed bag of Protestants there joining a mixed bag of bishops who actually, as the apostles of Christ, some of them don't sound as Catholic or as Christian as some of those self-styled apostles. So it's a sad day when Protestants sound more Catholic than the Catholic bishops do. Pray for this whole synodal process next month, that some of those voting on the policies there coming out of the Synod of Bishops next month will listen to the voices of reason, regardless of whose mouth that voice of reason comes out of. Jules, thank you so much for your report and your insights.
Thank you, Brad.